Hello, hello, hello. This is Tiffany Junkins from the Children's Services Division. We're going to be doing a webinar today on the full enrollment policy and the slot reallocation procedures. One of the things I want to go ahead and say just off the bat, because I know that this is something that's been highly anticipated from our delegate agencies, and so we're happy to be able to roll it out. As we go through this material today, I really want you to think about what our programs are going to look like as we pass COVID-19. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit more. But I want to welcome you all on the call for taking the opportunity to spend a little time with us this afternoon so that we can walk through the policy. I understand that we did not send the written copy of the policy out to you, but we will do that immediately after the webinar has been completed. I'm going to go ahead and show a copy of what that policy looks like so that you know what you're going to be getting when you get it. Everyone who registered, we sent them a series of 6 documents. And so this document here will be the 7th document. And this is the actual policy itself around funded enrollment and slot reallocation. So with that being said, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation. In light of COVID-19, we're operating a lot differently in our programs, and I want everyone to know that we understand that this is unusual for us, and it's going to be difficult while I'm talking about funded enrollment and talking about full enrollment at a time like this. I just want you to understand that we're not holding under enrollment against anybody at this point, because kind of going into COVID-19 as a grantee, we were under enrolled. And, we're still using the numbers of where we were enrolled at as of the last day that services were provided. And so that means that we're going to still be sitting there in the under enrollment space. We understand, we acknowledge that, and I want you to know that we will not penalize you because, if you happen to be under enrolled at a site or at your agency. With that being said, so the purpose of this webinar really was to make sure that you understand that as we rolled out the RFP and we got a lot of responses back because of the fact that we included site locations across the various communities that we have in the city of Chicago. And we were very specific in terms of where we were funding programs and what locations that were listed in your proposal. These are the sites that we're funding, and we understand that. So we heard you in terms of the fact that there may need to be some flexibility given in how we continue to make sure that our business thrives and can move forward. So now that we're in the first year of a 3-year contract, we do have an ability to have 2 one-year extensions, and that's the full 5 years. But now that we're in the first year of the 3-year contract, we've had many of you that have provided us with many different reasons why some slots needed to be moved. And so in the grand scheme of all the slots that we have, it is a small number of slots that we're talking about, but we understand that there's a need to move slots for business reasons, for business to go ahead and continue to thrive. And so we've heard you, and our law department has definitely heard us. And I want you to know that today we'll be sharing the guidelines that have been developed to assist with the slot movement that will be fair and equitable for all of our agencies. So the funded enrollment policy. So each delegate agency must maintain its funded enrollment level and then fill any vacancies as soon as possible, but no longer than the 30 days. And like I started the webinar to say, I wanted you to understand that during this time that we're in, and the fact that our programs mostly are closed except for emergency child care centers, we are not expecting full enrollment, and we're not expecting for you to fill vacancies in 30 days. So right now there is the flexibility that all of our delegate agencies have in the fact that right now everything is going to be on pause in this moment until we're able to operationalize again, and then we'll pick a date that we're going to actually resume than our normal operations. So what I'm talking about is the expectations if our programs were running, right? So we're expecting the full funded enrollment levels to be maintained, and we're expecting that vacancies be filled within 30 days, not during this time, and so that's the oxymoron here, right? So when we talk about slot allocation and slot assignment decisions, they're always going to be made in light of our funder mandates. And so we have federal funding, and we also have state funding. And with our federal funding, that's probably going to be a lot stricter than our state funding. And so, you know, we're given mandates by our funders that we must be fully enrolled, and we must make sure that we're recruiting then the most vulnerable children across all of our selection criteria. And that's really going to depend on each agency in the communities that you're in and identifying what's going to be the criteria that's going to be most important for the community that you represent. So in terms of slot reallocation procedures, so slots can be reallocated among sites if you have multiple sites in a center-based model or a family child care home if you're operating a family child care home. Slots may not be reallocated among funding streams or among program models. And so let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If you have a PFA contract with us, you can't move your PFA slot into and say, hey, I want to go ahead and make this a Head Start slot now, right? You can't do that. You have a PFA contract, and so your PFA contract has to go ahead and stick within the PFA guidelines. Most of you know that with our PFA slots, that PFA is approved according to the site location, and so we should get very few opportunities to even present movement in that particular category. But even vice versa, if you have a Head Start contract, you know, you can't all of a sudden make that Head Start contract Early Head Start Child Care Partnership contract. And so it's a different program, it's a different funding stream, it's a different grant. And so you can't reallocate amongst the funding streams or amongst the program models. You have to be able to stick with the particular program that you have and also the program model that you have. If you've been awarded, for instance, Head Start center-based slots, then that is the model that you've operated. And you can go ahead and allocate center-based slots among center-based in an actual center and also family child care homes, because we do look at those as being the same. However, you cannot use center-based slots for a home-based program. So the funding on each of those cost models are different, and we're not allowing that flexibility in terms of those types of program model changes. They're not being used interchangeably. And so I want to make that clear. If you've been approved for center-based, that's what you can operate. But if you've been approved for home-based, then that's what you can operate. In order to move slots or reallocate slots from the original location, a delegate agency must demonstrate that it has exhausted all efforts to recruit children and families to the under-enrolled site or program. Simply put, you know, you have to go ahead and make sure that you're doing everything possible before you ask us, can you move slots? And that means also working with the parents at that particular site to try and, you know, get their help. It's the responsibility of our delegate agencies to make sure that they're exhausting all efforts to recruit children and families to an under-enrolled site or program. And that includes working with the parent committee at that particular location and also working with the policy committee and board to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to keep operations viable in that location that was originally approved. So slot reallocation within a delegate agency. So slots will be assigned to a site according to the following conditions. if you have an active waiting list, if there is an ability to enroll children immediately, and also if you're fully staffed, and you've given us that information to ensure that we have, fully staffed and also the credentials necessary for the age group. As a part of our process, we also ask for, of course, the license information to make sure that whatever space that we're talking about is licensed, fully licensed for the age group that you want to operate. So the slot reallocation priorities, whether it's a directly operated site or it's a partner site, these three things will apply. So the first priority is to make sure that slots be reallocated to the site serving the same community area as the original site. And so it's very important that once you come to the grantee, that you're doing everything you can to try and keep those slots in the same community area. That's going to be very important for us, and that's why that's the first priority. If there is a situation where you cannot keep them in the same community, then we'll go to the second priority, which is that slots should be reallocated to sites serving communities within the same density ranking as the original site. And so one of the things I want you to do is kind of refer back to the community area grouping that we sent out in the email. And we're going to go ahead and pull it up here now so you'll see what I'm referring to. But it was in the RSP how communities were being grouped and how we're looking at them. And so I want to make sure that you have this information so that you understand when we talk about the community groupings and the density rank, that you understand where we're pulling this information from. So it was published in the RSP, and we have a density ranking in table A1 is related to 3 to 5 year old programming, but then we have a table A2 for 0 to 3, birth to 3, and so that's going to be a little different. So one, you have to make sure that you're matching up the density rank with the age grouping that you're referencing. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 3 to 5 option. And so when I look at 3 to 5 and I look at a community, for instance, I'm looking at Dunning, and Dunning is located under the density rank number 3. Then what we're saying is there's a couple of more community groupings that are going to be in higher demand than Dunning. Okay, but within Dunning is also grouped with a lot of other communities. So if you look at the community areas that are in the grouping, then you'll see that as a part of this, that when we're talking about the density rank is going to be important under the second priority in the fact that you can move a slot. If you can't stick to the same community as Dunning, then you have all of these other communities that are also in the same density rank as Dunning. And so that's going to be important, right? So I can't find any slots or a place to move these slots to in Dunning, but yet maybe there is slots that I can go ahead and move to Morgan Park. And because they're in the same density rank, number 3, then that is movement that is going to be acceptable by the grantee. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. So that's the second priority. The third priority is, so slots should be reassigned to sites serving communities with a higher density ranking as the original site. So here we're able to do upgrading of the density ranking. And let me just show you how this works. We're going to go back to the density rank that we were just using. And so in the case of Dunning, knowing that I can upgrade density ranking, what that means is I can improve density ranking. So Dunning is in density rank number 3. I can go ahead and move slots then. If I can't move them necessarily to any that are in the community grouping as Dunning, I can improve the community rank by going to density rank 2 or going to community in density rank number 1. You can move to improve the density rank. You just can't diminish the density ranking, but you can definitely improve it. So I can go from a density rank 3 and say, hey, I want to go ahead and serve slots in, let's say, the Austin community. instead. And that is going to be acceptable then to the grantee because of the demand in those communities that are in higher. So the 3 priorities, just to go ahead and sum them up. So the first priority, we want to go ahead and stick to the same community area. That's going to be important when you're asking to go ahead and move slots. The same community area is going to be what's most important, right? And then the next priority, if you're not able to keep them in the same community area, would be at least the same density rank that those slots came from. And so the community area grouping, you have that information, and if you can keep them there, then great. That's the second priority. The third priority is the fact that you can upgrade your density rank. And so if you have the ability to do that, then that's going to be acceptable as well. So as I mentioned before, this is basically just showing an illustration of what's going to be acceptable in terms of moving slots. So if slots are moving, and I mentioned Dunning, but any of those community areas that are in density rank number 3, if I want to go ahead and move them and increase the density rank and improve on that, I can do that, right? I can move those slots to density rank number 2 communities or density rank number 1 communities. That's going to be acceptable movement for upgrading a density rank. The next slide is illustrating. The next slide is illustrating unacceptable movement. So you can't diminish density ranking. So I give an example of Austin, and I'm using the birth to 3, by the way, density rank example here. But if you look in under density rank number 1 in the Austin community or the Auburn-Gresham community, those are going to be some of the higher density areas where we're saying that slots, we really need slots to be there. And so trying to ask the grantee, can I move slots from density rank number 1 to a lower density rank, is going to be something that we're not going to be able to do, and we're not going to be able to approve any slot reallocations that will just diminish then the density rank. So trying to move a density rank 1 community program to a density rank 2 is going to be unacceptable. Trying to move a density 1 rank community program to a density 3 or beyond is going to be unacceptable. And so those are things that we're going to have to say no to. So now we're going to get into slot relinquishment. So if a delegate agency has gone through the 3 priorities, they've tried to keep the slots in the same community. They have then went to the density rank where those slots belong, and they've tried to reallocate to different programs within there, to different sites, and that does not work out. And you try to upgrade density rank if upgrading is available, and none of those things work. Now we're talking about possibly having to then relinquish slots. So if the delegate agencies remained under enrolled, the delegate agency will be required then to relinquish slots to DFSS, so those slots can be reassigned immediately to another delegate agency site that can meet full enrollment. So slots that are going to be returned to the grantee, to DFSS, we're going to follow the same priorities as mentioned before. So it's the same. It's going to be going back to that original community area. So any delegate agencies that I have that are operating in the community area where slots left, those are the agencies that we're going to target and make opportunities available then for those delegate agencies that currently have operations in that particular community area. We're going to go to those agencies first. If you're fully enrolled and your program is thriving, then they're going to get an opportunity then to get those slots if they're coming from that same community. If there are no programs or no sites in that particular community, then we're going to go to the second priority, which is the same density rank. And we're going to go ahead and go through that and see if we can open it up then to more delegate agencies who may be serving a site or have a program in that particular area. Now, keep in mind, all of this is only possible, of course, if you have a contract for that particular funding stream. But we're going to open it up to the density rank. And if that does not work for us, then we're going to do the upgrade option if it's available, okay? The only density rank that can't be upgraded really is density 1 because it's already at our highest level. So if a delegate agency relinquishes slots and DFSS cannot reassign them, then what DFSS reserves the right to do is to allow then the original delegate agency to then reallocate those slots among its existing sites. And so if the grantee cannot reallocate those slots, then that is the opportunity. Then we're going to go back to that original agency who had to return the slot, and then allow them to go ahead and see if they can reallocate them amongst their existing sites. Some of the considerations that one slot come back in to the grantee, and some of the things that we want you to be able to kind of look at as well as we're going through this is we want you to make sure that you can demonstrate to us that you actually have an active waiting list. We've been asking people to keep active waiting lists in the COPA system, and so that way we can see them, and we know that you do have families who are waiting to get into your programs, and we can actually see them. In addition to that, having the ability to immediately enroll children within your license and your contract is going to be pivotal. So those are going to be things that we're going to be looking at as we make considerations for how we're going to allow agencies to move slots, or if we're redistributing slots back out to our delegate agencies, how we're going to be able to make this happen. Of course, fully staffed classrooms and making sure that the credentials exist for the age group that's being served. And if there's any service to special populations, that we're also going to make those considerations as well. As a grantee, it's going to be our responsibility to make sure that we're looking at community area capacity in terms of oversaturation and undersaturation. We wouldn't want to go ahead and approve to move slots to a community where it's oversaturated already. And so, you know, that could be a reason why we may have to deny a request if we feel, according to the slots that we know that are out there in the community, that may not be a wise decision then for the other funded programs that we have in the area. We're all in this together, and we want to make sure that as we're making slot decisions that it's going to make sense for everybody. If slot decisions that we're making also are going to disrupt any service, we want to make sure that we're considering all spectrums of this, right? That we're not just being one-sided about it, and maybe it's causing a domino effect or a ripple effect. If we move these slots out of the service area or out of the community, what is that going to do or impact, you know, the other things, the jobs in that particular community? How is it going to impact the children who do need services in that community? We're going to be considering things like continuity of relationships to make sure that we can still have that flexibility that, you know, that's one of the things that we put in the RFP that we want our programs to continue to do. And so if there's those opportunities to make sure that we can make those connections as we're thinking about reallocating slots, we want to make sure that we're keeping continuity of relationships in there as well. Some other considerations, you know, if we're talking about moving slots, we want to look at the possible consequences. And so I know that we've had some slots that were returned to us. And, you know, we're trying to make sure that we work with programs to ensure that when we're looking at any type of closures, whether it's a classroom closing or a site closing, the impact of staff, any kind of layoffs or reduction in force, that we can try and minimize the risk to our families. And that's always going to be kind of most important to us when we're making these types of considerations, and whether we can go ahead and move slots or even relinquish slots. We're going to always try and work with you to make sure that we're making the best possible decisions that we can, and timely decisions as well. we're going to make sure that we're considering what our funder is asking us to do, as we want to make sure that we're going to continue to be funded through this process. And so full enrollment is something that is real. And so that's something that we're, constantly having to have flashbacks about. The last bullet, I wanted to go ahead and make sure I spent just a little bit of time talking about delegate agencies that have been notified by DFSS to be high risk. And there's going to be instances, perhaps within this foreseeable contract, where there may be times when DFSS will have to notify a delegate agency of possible high risk status. And so at this point, this is kind of the beginning for every one of these new contracts that started December 1. And we're hoping not to have anybody in that high risk category. But if so, I just want to let you know that we drafted some guidance to kind of let you know that if you fall in that category, that is something that we'll have to notify you about. But not only that, it does impact if an agency is going to be in high risk status, if we're going to actually be able to award additional slots to an agency who is in high risk capacity. Those are things that we have to go ahead and consider along and in this process. So three of the categories that we wanted to make sure that you were aware that we've created for high risk is going to be fiscal operations, and fiscal matters. We want to make sure that our agencies are going to be financially viable, and that you have clean audits, and there's going to be very little disruption there in terms of financially being able to have financially viable programs. In addition to that, we also are going to be concerned about safe environment and making sure that the facility itself. So when we have facility assessments conducted on the program, globetrotters may come out and they may, see certain things, and we're following up, and things that may have to be corrected within your buildings to make sure that we're keeping children safe. Those are the types of things that we want to make sure that you understand can also put you in a high risk category. And we want to make sure that we're calling attention to that. In addition to that, programmatic operations as well is another category for us when we're talking about high risk. And so we're going to go ahead and pull up our high risk criteria just so you know the document that we sent. I want to make sure that you're able to reference it so that you have a full understanding of what we're talking about. So I mentioned already with fiscal, it talks about audit findings. And it's not that we're talking about that you can't have any audit findings. It's really about the fact of the corrective action that's taken to go ahead and correct audit findings and making sure that they're not going to be repeat findings over a period of time. Also included under fiscal is being on the debarred list. If you are disqualified for the child and adult care food program, then this is something that can put you in high risk status. As far as safe environments, we talked about some of the things that you can be in non-compliance with Department of Buildings, things that will cause health and safety concerns for us. We want to make sure that we're mitigating the risks and potential opportunities here. We want to make sure we're keeping children safe. So safe environment is definitely going to be one of those categories where we wouldn't want anybody to fall into high risk because of it, but it is something that is a possibility, and we want to make sure that you understand if we had to notify any of our delegate agencies about a high risk status. And last but not least, but also our programmatic operations. So if there's a deficiency within a program review, if there's a non-compliance or let's say criminal records checks, if there's things that we found to be in non-compliance, but the corrective action hasn't taken place, those are things that can kind of put a program into high risk status, And so we want to make sure that you're aware of this, and this is something that really can be a whole nother webinar, and we'll definitely make sure that we get something out there so that we can kind of go in deeper about this. But I wanted to let you know, because this is one of the things that's embedded in the policy for slot reallocation, is that you're not high risk, and so if you haven't been notified that you're in high risk, then you're not. But the grantee would have to notify you in writing that you are high risk if that is the case. So our slot reallocation form, I think most of you are familiar with our slot reallocation form, and the slot reallocation form really is used for a variety of different reasons. But I wanted to go ahead and highlight the fact that, the form is used to go ahead and make sure we're reallocating slots. But in addition to that, the form is also used to request additional slots, but the same form is also used to relinquish slots as well. The form can also be used to request to add a new site or a new partner site. So those are some of the various ways that you can use the slot reallocation form. You have a copy of it, and we're going to just be going through kind of that first page through these slides. Make sure that you have it out so that you can follow along in terms of what the expectation is regarding the slot reallocation form itself. So when you're applying for a slot reallocation, in the very first box in the upper left-hand corner is the type of application. So what are you applying for, right? If you're applying for new slots, you have to go ahead and indicate the application itself. So if it's Head Start, indicate Head Start. If it's PFA, indicate PFA. It makes it very clear. Makes it very clear to us to be able to know which program you're talking about if you are funded by multiple contracts with us. Number two, it allows you to check yes or no if this is a new site. If it's a new site or a new partner, then there's something additional that you have to do with Schedule A. However, if your reallocation request or additional slots is among a site that we already fund, then number two would say no. Okay, it's not a new site, it's not a new partner request. You're trying to add slots then to an additional site that you already have, and you can check no. The application date goes in number three, and the applicant's information is pretty standard. So, of course, your agency's legal name is needed, and also your main office address, street address, city and zip information as well. Because we're making a lot of decisions according to community area, one of the things that we're going to be asking to accompany the slot reallocation form is a memo that's going to be attached. And so we'll get into kind of what we need to have the memo say in this particular presentation. But number five, it talks about the slot reallocation request. And so if you're asking for additional slots, depending on the contract, then you want to make sure that you're telling us under 5 how many additional slots you are requesting. If you are relinquishing slots under a particular category, then you could still use this section, but you will put a negative number instead in this section so that we understand that you're relinquishing slots. And plus, we would have a letter to accompany that as well to help us understand. So this particular section of the form listed after the slot request in numbers is section 6 that talks about adding or removing a slot from the allocation sheet. So again, you know, all of the sites that were approved under the RFP, those locations where approvals happened, they appeared on your notice, your funding notice. And as a part of that, if you are trying to remove a site from that, then you need to go ahead and indicate here that you're removing. And likewise, if you're planning on adding a particular location that you would like for us to take a look at for consideration, then this is the section where you're going to either add or remove a site. And this could be your directly operated or your partner location. What goes a long way in this section is making sure that you give us an effective date of when you want to add and when you want to move. That helps us as well. We're going to go back just really quick. I just wanted to point out the highlighted section at the bottom. It mentions that this is a new site, to please include copies of your DFSS license and teaching staff criminal checks and credentials. So if you are asking to have a new site added, whether it's a family child care home or a center-based program, we need to make sure that we have the license information in our building. If your main office is moving, and you want to go ahead and use this form to indicate maybe your administrative office is changing, then, you know, make sure that we get that information as well, to make sure that we have all of our records correct on our side. So this is the kind of the bottom part, so to speak, of the form, right? This one-page form when you're applying for slot reallocation, or you're adding a new site, or you're removing a new site. All of this is something that we want you to understand, that through this process, because we're not just talking about slots themselves, we're talking about slots that serve children. And because we're serving actual children, and it's not just about the slot that is the reimbursed portion, we want to make sure that we're communicating this throughout the organization, and that communication is working its way through the board, making sure that communications happen there. We want to make sure that communications is happening at the policy committee level and also at the parent committee level. There are certain signatures that we look for as well to make sure that any request that they have the approval of your executive director, your board chair, and the board chair, of course, is approving on behalf of the board, and also that the policy committee chairperson's signature will be them approving on behalf of the policy committee itself. This is important, and we want to make sure that if we're talking about moving slots, whether it's moving slots, increasing slots, or relinquishing slots, that there's been conversation throughout the organization that it's not something that's a surprise to any particular party. You know, if slots are going to be removed from a site, then that parent committee should have an opportunity to be engaged in that conversation. And of course, your policy committee, your board as well. And we're looking for approval signatures to be attached to this information. Highlighted, we wanted to make sure that you understand that what they're attesting to. And they're attesting to the fact that this information was presented to them, that it is true and it is correct, and that this is movement that they've already approved. So in addition to the slot allocation form itself, and we just kind of went through the form in 3 different parts, even though it is a one-page document. In addition to that, what we're asking for programs to do is to help us understand in a formal memo. Because the slot reallocation form itself can mean many different things to many different people. And so we want to make sure that we understand, and that there's going to be a letter that's going to be addressed to our Deputy Commissioner of Children's Services, so Rachel Burgess-Burnett, so that she understands what's being asked. The other thing is, you know, as a part of this formal request to go ahead and make slot movement, whether it's additional slots or relinquishing slots or just slot movement, that we understand exactly what you're doing. We want you to also make sure that as a part of this, that you're really attesting and a good faith efforts have been met to make sure that you're recruiting families within that original site recruitment area. That's going to be important. And the reason why that's important is because where we approved the slots for originally, we want to make sure that we're protecting the integrity of the RFP process. And if there's a business decision that's being made to go ahead and move slots, we want to make sure that all efforts were exhausted in that particular community first before we try to go outside of that approved site or approved community. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we're documenting all points of engagement with eligible families, any potential partners if applicable, that we've engaged our parent committee, and we should be able to see that if we're looking in parent committee minutes, and that the policy committee has been engaged, and that we can actually see that this information has been brought to them and they show up in minutes, and also the board of directors. We want to make sure that all points of engagement, that there can be some type of communication in this memo to describe these touch points that you've had to make sure that you're engaging these individuals who we've mentioned. Some other things that need to be included in the memo would be including evidence of working with the site's parent committee. We want to know that you've engaged them, and I think I've mentioned this already, but you know, we want to know that we're not just making decisions and we're not considering the potential that it's going to have, and maybe how that parent committee can really kind of help as well, word of mouth, and making sure that we get recruitment efforts that are going to be really grassroots and get them to help with boosting enrollment if there is an enrollment issue there. That we give the parents in our program an opportunity to really kind of help our program thrive, and that there's some grassroots efforts happening. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we include evidence of working with the agency's governing body to make sure that we're recruiting eligible families and or partner sites if applicable. That we also include the evidence that we have been working within those 3 priorities. And those 3 priorities, remember, are that we're trying to keep slots in that same community area. And when that's not possible, that we're at least keeping them in the same density rank. And when that's not possible, understand that we're within our authority to go ahead and upgrade a density rank. So those are the 3 priorities outlined, and we need to make sure that when you're writing a memo to talk about slot reallocation, whether you're requesting more or asking to relinquish some or just slot movement, that we understand that you've considered then these 3 priorities as well, and that you're able to document that in your formal memo. In addition to that, we want to make sure that, that there's going to be evidence that the policy committee and also the board has already approved in your proposed slot reallocation plan, because this is something that should be presented to them before even coming to us. We want to make sure that there's buy-in there, and not just buy-in, but there's approval. So I want to go ahead and open it up for questions. I know that we already have quite a bit of questions. And let me try and see how many I can get through here. And yep, very first question, and I think this is a great question. Someone had mentioned the fact that PFA or PI cannot be subgranted. You cannot subgrant those slots. So Head Start, our Head Start program is unique in the sense of we have some Head Start delegates who actually have partner sites that have been approved by us, and that's okay. Understand that if you've been granted slots for PFA or PI, then you can't do that. You've been approved for that particular location, for that particular site, and that's where it's been approved. You can't subgrant those out. And in most instances, depending, right, that is something that we'll consider, but even moving those slots, because the location where they've been approved, that generally is where those PFA and PI slots will stay, because the location itself is what was approved. Someone had mentioned applying for more slots. I think that's the question, and if that's the question, you guys can always apply for more slots. We're in the process now where we do have additional requests in our office, and I do want you to know that we're going to be working our way through the current list that we have to go ahead and make slot determinations. Some of you have already heard from us in terms of slot decisions, and some of you have not. I'm aware of that. As we are now kind of rolling this information out, I wanted you to be able to understand where we can make slot movement, the things that we can say yes to that's within our authority, and the things that are not within our authority to approve. So I think that was really the most important part of having this webinar, was to let you know what's within our authority and what's not. And slot movement is one of those everybody wants to know about. And because of how we made RFP decisions, we want to make sure that we're upholding the integrity of the process by having something that's going to be fair and equitable across the city. Someone asked, does the active waiting list have to be entered into COPA? That's the preferred way. I guess my thing is, if you have an active waiting list and it's sitting outside of COPA, I guess my question to you would be, why isn't it in COPA? And how can we get you to start using COPA so us as a grantee, we can see it? The problem with having things outside of COPA is it's really hard then for us to see. And, you know, we have a monitoring team here who can go into COPA and they can actually take a look and see if there is a waiting list. But if you have it sitting outside of COPA, it's really difficult then for us to tell if you have a waiting list or not. So Monique, I'd definitely like to follow up with you to try and see kind of what can we do to try and get, you know, that waiting list into COPA. If there's any barriers or restrictions that you know, restricting you, I'd definitely like to know about it. So how can we show an active list for expecting mothers? So we do have what we call, under Early Head Start and also PI, we're able to enroll expectant mothers. And so if there's going to be an issue on how we reflect that, let me know. Follow up with, I'm going to need to follow up with Craig to kind of see what our limitations are regarding expectant mothers. And so shoot me an email. I'll go ahead and get Craig involved, and we'll go ahead and see how we can assist with being able to represent expecting mothers. But we are kind of notating expectant mothers as far as the child is being in an unborn status until they're born. The next question, it says, please describe how to shift the PFA slot to PI within the same community area or site. So we are not, I guess the question is that we're not shifting PFA to PI. If you have a PFA contract, then that's what you have a contract for. But if you have PI, then you have authority to go ahead and operate the PI program. In terms of being able to shift between the two, we're not allowing that at this time. The next question, how long would DFSS take to approve slot reallocation? Betty, I hear you. I know for a lot of people, they've been waiting. And they've been waiting on us to have approval from law. And so now that we have that approval, this is something that we're going to be, you know, trying to get out the door as quickly as possible. I think just like with you guys, we're also working on limited staffing as well. And so we're going to do our best to go ahead and get those out as quickly as possible. Victor and I, we're going to be, you know, we're going to be working, doing everything that we can to go ahead and be responsive to the requests that we currently have. And if you're waiting on something and we haven't responded to you, what I'm going to ask is that you and everybody else, please go ahead and follow up with an email with me, because if we could go ahead and set up something with you so that we can make sure that, that we have all those 3 priority areas covered. And as long as you know the request that you made to us, and if you feel like it fits within the policy itself and that we can move on those slots, then we want to definitely be able to do that within the next couple of weeks. The next question, it says, can a center that has 2 locations in the same community, but is only funded for Early Head Start and Head Start at one center, receive additional slots for the center that is not currently Early Head Start or Head Start? So the slots themselves go to delegate agencies. And so what I'm going to ask is that people think about the delegate agencies themselves having Head Start contracts and an Early Head Start contract. Delegate agencies are able then to go ahead and request for slot movement amongst the sites that they have, okay? So it may not be a site where you have current Head Start or Early Head Start, but it's within your wheelhouse, so to speak, is within the sites that you currently have, because the slots are really going to the delegate agency. And so think of it like that. You as an agency with us, do you have a contract for Head Start? And, you know, if you have a contract for Head Start and you want to make a proposal to go ahead and move Head Start slots to a different site is what we're talking about. And depending on what you present to us, then that's something that we may be able to go ahead and do as long as it fits within the policy. Next question is, do we need to wait for approval, or can slot reallocations be made on the program level as long as we are following the guidelines? So it's a great question, and you need approval. You need approval because we need to know where the children are. And because we need to know where the children are, that's one of the reasons why it's not okay just to go ahead and make movement outside of the grantee approving. I don't know, I've been around for a long time in Head Start, and it's embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing, if we had a review and somebody showed up to a site that they thought we were funding, but turns out that the agency has actually moved the slots to a different location and the grantee doesn't know about it. That should never be the case, and we want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in a pickle like that. So slot movement is something that does require our approval. I think it helps if you understand what this new policy is and you have made sure that you are working within this approved policy. That definitely helps us to be able to give you a quick yes, as opposed to something that is outside of policy. Can you move slots to a site that does not currently have the funding? Example, if I have a PI slot at site 1 not filled, can I move them to site 2 that does not have funding? Site 2 has full enrollment and qualified staff. So, Megan, with PFA and PI, we actually approve the location. And so that's the difference with PFA and PI. There's going to be very little opportunity for us to go ahead and move PFA and PI slots because they're approved according to the site location itself. And so if you have more questions about that, please make sure that you follow up with me. But what you're proposing, I think in most circumstances it would be no. That the site that was approved is where those slots should be. Next question. Will you be taking into account whether or not agencies are progressing with a current corrective action plan? Absolutely. If agencies are currently on a corrective action plan and they're making progress and they're sticking to the time frames that are within their corrective action plan, then absolutely, we're going to work with those programs. At the end of the day, it does the grantee no good to actually keep slots and not put them back out into communities. And so we definitely want to make sure that we're not just holding on to slots at the grantee level, that we're pushing out these slots to communities where they can be enrolled. I'm going to take one last question, and then we're going to have to follow up the rest in an FAQ. We're about wrapping up at the 4 o'clock hour. So the next question. Will children already enrolled in unfunded slots also be taken into consideration? Unfunded slots. I'm not sure what you mean and what's the question here, but I'm assuming if you have additional children in your program, maybe over the amount that we've actually funded you for, I'm assuming this is what this is asking, that you have additional children above what we funded you for. Can you go ahead and submit a slot reallocation to request additional slots? And you're definitely within your authority to go ahead and ask for additional slots. Again, we don't necessarily have additional slots in some categories. I think everybody is aware that we have an abundance of Head Start slots that we need to actually give out. And I haven't gotten enough requests to be even able to match the request of the slots that we have for Head Start. Some of the other funding streams, however, that are also in high demand. We just don't have enough slots. PI, early head start, we don't have enough of those slots. And so where there's some flexibility and where you're serving children, if you are submitting a slot reallocation and the slots are available and it falls within policy, we're going to be ready to go ahead and make some decisions about those. Absolutely. So with that being said, you guys, I just want to thank you for tuning in with us and taking time to kind of discuss slot reallocation. I understand that you still have questions and they still need to be answered. Feel free to go ahead and reach out to me. If you submitted a slot reallocation request and you're waiting on a response from us, go ahead and send me an email. That is fine. We can go ahead and make sure that we are addressing it over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be teaming with Victor so that we can go ahead and get these decisions out to you. All right. Thank you so much. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.